I'm here so I won't get fined.
You think you know sports? Well, you don't know. Well, you don't know Jack. The You Don't Know Jack Show starts now.
Hello, and welcome to this emergency sort of episode of the You Don't Know Jack Show, as we'll be having a regular episode later this week, but right now we have some breaking news, not really breaking news, but it was broke earlier today that Adrian Peterson's option for the 2017 season, which he was set to make $18 million, has been declined by the Vikings. And I am joined by a Vikings writer and a Chiefs writer and just a contributor to PFF, as he's been on the show before, Eric Eager. Eric, thanks for joining us on such short notice here today.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Eric, when you first heard the news, I assume you weren't terribly surprised, but what was your reaction?
I was actually pretty relieved. As a guy who follows the Vikings and has been a fan most of his life, I think I could see a scenario where the Vikings became sort of too attached and sort of continued to allow that offense to hang itself through having to shoehorn Adrian Peterson touches and carries and everything like that, and pay him that kind of money and all of those things. So I was pretty relieved that it looks as though they're at least not going to pay him the $18 million that he was owed, and it probably looks like he's going to be not a Viking next year. So I was actually fairly relieved. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you maybe thought the Wilfs were like, oh, but it's Adrian Peterson. We love him, and he meant so much to us. We probably got him as a steal as the 7th overall pick, considering the career he's had. And he's just been so awesome. But I think maybe Rick Spielman had to do a little arm twisting to maybe convince the Wilfs that this is the best decision. And obviously, he could still come back, as I wrote in my article on armchairallamericans.com. You can check that out, by the way, plug. But you can check that out because it's interesting how the Vikings could come about this. They could just maybe do a one-year type prove-it deal, like maybe they will with, who was it they were going to try a deal like that with? Maybe, I can't remember. I had that player in my mind, or somebody, that maybe a one-year prove-it deal would be a good deal for the Vikings. But anyways, maybe one of those, or a 2 to 3 year, very small guaranteed deal, mostly guaranteed up front, and then if nothing happens next year, then you can cut him again, or you can have him do what he wants. But definitely not completely off the table, but I think the Vikings are pretty well set in stone that Adrian's done in Minnesota, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would appear that they've been moving sort of away from the, 2 tight end, 2 running back, kind of 3 tight ends, 1 receiver offenses that they employed a lot in 2015 to sort of hide a weak offensive line, but to also sort of placate to the fact that Peterson is at his best when he's running from an I formation or running from a sort of a 7 yards deep kind of set, whereas it looks like Shermer, is trying to gravitate the Vikings offense more towards more spread stuff, more shotgun things, more quick passing type plays. And you saw towards the end of the year that Jerick McKinnon became very much an integral part of the passing game out of the backfield. And those are just skills, whether they be running out of the shotgun or catching passes out of the backfield or helping the offensive line block. Those are just skills that Adrian Peterson has never really had, and to expect a 31-year-old running back to acquire them at this point in his career probably pretty foolhardy to assume that at this point.
Yeah. We're not going to have Norv Turner's offense 7-step drops with TJ Clemmings playing left tackle.
That's right. And in the way that the league goes, I mean, it's one of those things where the running game is just, a very much a complementary piece now when passing games are so efficient. And at his best, Adrian Peterson is 2012 season where he rushed for 2,000 yards, averaged about 6 yards a carry. Well, the worst passing games in the league average about 6 yards, per pass attempt. And it's one of those things where the running game is just it's a change of pace now. It's not the means by which offensive football wins.
Right. And a Vikings fan on Facebook was trying to tell me that the Vikings are much scarier to defenses when Adrian Peterson is on the field, which that used to be the case. But from what I've seen, and here's a stat for you Vikings fans out there, and Eric, I'll be intrigued to see what your reaction to this is. The Vikings were third in play-action success or something to that effect. Here's what it says. Ready to play Mythbusters is the question. The assumption about the Vikings losing Adrian Peterson for most of the season was what they would not be able to run effective play-action. On the contrary, they were third best in the entire NFL on play-action plays behind only the Redskins and the Falcons, and they ran 18% of the time, ran them that much. That was the 13th most. And according to Football Outsiders, the Vikings improved their offensive production on play action versus all other plays more than any other team. And this was without Adrian Peterson. So the myth that Adrian improves play action was pretty much busted, as it said right there, I think.
Yeah, and Sam Bradford specifically ran play action on 21.1% of his snaps and had a quarterback rating of about 96 under those conditions. 5 of his 20 touchdown passes came on play action. None of his interceptions did. Actually, his quarterback rating, was 110.2 on play action, which is about 10 points higher than it was throughout the course of the season. So yeah, he was very much effective in that role. And again, I think the big issue, is Adrian Peterson was a home run threat as a running back for years for Minnesota, but ultimately at this point, he commanded so many resources, both money as well as sort of plays specifically designed for him, that the development of Teddy Bridgewater, for example, in 2015 was stunted because they just didn't allow him to throw the ball with reckless abandon the way that they allowed him to in 2014. The Colts game, Adrian Peterson's last game as a Viking, presumably, almost every time he was in that game, he got the ball,
Mm-hmm.
And it was sort of back to the Brad Childress Peterson pass punt drive joke.
Yes.
It was just one of those things where if he's in the game, he's not worthwhile as a pass blocker. He's not worthwhile as a pass receiver. So what is he going to be in there for? Well, he's going to be in there to run. And in today's NFL, you almost sort of need a running back who's kind of got a low self-esteem. He's sort of a running back that's going to be happy getting whatever carries he's getting, who's delighted to get balls out of the backfield as a receiver, who's willing to stick his nose in there and block, because that's just so much less predictable and so much more, the par for the course these days. And Adrian Peterson just isn't that guy. And yeah, there's just a lot of myths associated with a guy like that, like the play action one you described.
Yeah. You're listening to the You Don't Know Jack Show, powered now by ArmchairAllAmericans.com, as we officially have moved over to their site. Carson Schubert, joined by Eric Eager. Eric, do you think that the Vikings play-action passing game happened to gain some better traction in the shotgun? Do you think shotgun play-action passing maybe improved that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that the plays that you run shotgun out of under center are just so much more slow developing. They require so much more out of the offensive line. And let's face it, the Vikings offensive line a season ago just didn't have the chops to be able to sort of give Sam Bradford that kind of time, whereas now you can sort of think about a lot of the plays that they ran. It's sort of the running back sweeping across the quarterback's face out of the shotgun and then quick throws to Kyle Rudolph, those types of things. And yeah, it's just one of those where, it's how are you giving your quarterback the best opportunity to be successful? And I just think, in the current regime where the offense is so predictable with Peterson, you're just not. And the less predictability there, the better it is for Sam Bradford and the Vikings offense.
Right. And the thing with running Peterson out of the shotgun, first of all, it's something he didn't like to do. And it seemed like throughout Adrian Peterson's career, especially in the last few years, he has not tried to improve as much as he says he tries to improve in areas he doesn't do well. But the shotgun running, the receiving, and all this other stuff has not improved. And you can look at it statistically, and you can't say that it has improved. And, the whole he doesn't like running behind a fullback thing, even though I think it was Jerome Felton who contributed highly to his successful MVP season in 2012. Obviously, Peterson did a lot himself, but I think Jerome Felton helped out quite a bit. And Peterson, after that season, really has not done much at all.
Well, I think one of the issues, so when Peterson was a rookie, he ran behind Tony Richardson, who made a Pro Bowl in 2007. I think his discussion of a fullback was back in the day with the infamous Nafahu Tahi, who, in addition to being the 12th man in the huddle in New Orleans, was not a particularly good fullback, if I'm recalling, right?
Yeah.
So I think it was more the ineffectiveness of Tahi than it was his affinity for fullbacks, because as you said, Jerome Felton had quite a year in 2012. But yeah, if you look at Peterson's grades, so you look at some PFF grades, he has had a negative pass receiving grade every year of his career except his rookie year, and a lot of that, again, you can contribute that he had a couple big plays, including his first career touchdown against the Falcons. Mm-hmm. And if you look at his pass blocking grade in all of the seasons where he played more than 100 snaps, he's only had one, which was 2009, where he had a positive pass blocking grade. And, he's just and he hasn't gotten better. If you look at his quarterback hurries given up, they've been an increasing function of his season. So he gave up the most quarterback hurries of his career in 2015. He also gave up, a sack and a few hits. He's just, I sort of think of him as I would think of Shaquille O'Neal, right? If you're looking at 38-year-old Shaq and you're irritated that he can't make free throws, well, at that point you're sort of like, well, Shaq was the biggest kid growing up, and so why would he learn how to shoot the ball with touch, right? All he has to do is barrel over kids and score from 2 feet away from the rim. Peterson's been the best running back in his league for as long as he can remember. Why should he learn how to catch or block? Because his team's probably giving him the ball, every single down. Why would he have to learn? And even when he got to the NFL, he was the best runner in the league probably from day one. And so, and he's probably been told that numerous times. And so at this point, it's the fault of the person who's expecting him to become a better player all around than it probably is him.
Right. Yeah, he totally needed that confidence boost for his ego, I tell you what.
Yeah, right.
So, obviously, Adrian Peterson, as I wrote in my article, we really are grateful in Minnesota for the great years that he had. Obviously, 2007 was phenomenal, the 296 game against San Diego, and, of course, the 2012 MVP season, and just running all over the Packers was awesome to see and get us into the playoffs. He single-handedly got us to the playoffs that year. There's no doubt about it. But there's no really other year you can say that Peterson actually got the Vikings into the playoffs and the Vikings have won very few playoff games when Peterson has been a part of those playoff teams.
Yeah, I mean, 2008, he won the Russian title, and they had Gus Frerotte and Tavares Jackson,
right,
and went 10-6. They also had Jared Allen and a fantastic defense.
Yeah.
But I would say, yeah. I mean, if you look at the course of his career, and I tweeted about this today, I think I look at Peterson's career fondly, but in terms of my top Vikings, I don't actually, and I've been watching the Vikings since the early 90s, and I have some historical perspective on sort of the Vikings, franchise, but let's say 1990 to today, I would say Adrian Peterson's barely in my top 10 Vikings, just because, of his limitations, how much he limited the Vikings offense in terms of being a fumbler. So, I mean, the biggest game of Adrian Peterson's career, the 2009 against the Saints NFC Championship game, Chester Taylor was the one that ripped off that long run to get the Vikings into field goal range, so that right before the 12 men in the huddle and the Favre interception. To me, Chris Carter was on the field, in 1998 NFC Championship game down the stretch. Randy Moss, they were going deep to Randy Moss in overtime against the Falcons, right? Randy Moss stepped into Lambeau Field with a bum ankle and scored 2 touchdowns to beat the Packers in the playoffs that one year. Antoine Winfield was an absolute monster. Pat and Kevin Williams were leading the league in stopping the run. Chris Dolman, John Randall, right? They were, I think, better at their positions, and their positions were more valuable to the league at that time. So when I think of Adrian Peterson, I think of him as a fantastic runner. But I'm not necessarily all that drunk with his impact on the Vikings franchise, being that they've won exactly one playoff game in his era.
Yeah, and look at all the Super Bowl winners. How many of them have an MVP caliber running back? Not many. I mean, you look at the Cowboys and Emmitt Smith, yes, but look who they had. They had Deion Sanders on the other side of the ball. They had Troy Aikman as quarterback. Maybe you can say he wasn't as good as some others, but and you had Michael Irvin at wide receiver. So, I mean, you've got all these playmakers. Super Bowl this year, the Patriots go by running back by committee. They've got a great quarterback. And you got last year, Denver, they kind of had a running back by committee. And it's just like the NFL, you don't need a star running back to win a Super Bowl.
Yep, the Denver Broncos, Steve Anderson is an undrafted free agent. LeGarrette Blount's an undrafted free agent who in 2014 was cut by a team and picked up in the middle of the season, and then the starting running back in the Super Bowl for the Patriots. It's one of those things where, and the Patriots are such that, they go from, you could tell that the Falcons game this year for the Super Bowl, that was going to be a LeGarrette Blount type of game. And then he fumbles and they get behind, and then it's a James White kind of game, and it's just one of those things where, there's an honest to God question as to whether or not, like, if the Vikings were in that same position and Peterson fumbled in the second quarter of the Super Bowl and they were forced to go make it a Jerick McKinnon game, and Jerick McKinnon had, 14 catches like James White, and they won the Super Bowl and Peterson only got 5 carries, would that ever even be a thing? I don't think so, right? The Vikings very much shoehorned Adrian Peterson the ball, whether or not that was the best thing for their team or not.
Right.
And I think like I said earlier, I think running backs with sort of who aren't needy, running backs who are kind of low self-esteem, I think, are very much the kind of way of the way it works now, right? And it's very expensive to get a running back that's good at everything, right? Le'Veon Bell's not going to come cheap. Jamaal Charles, the guy we talked about off air, not going to come cheap necessarily. Those guys are hard to find. So what do teams do? Generally, teams will find a cadre of guys, all of whom have different complementary skills. And I think that's worked for a lot of teams.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we cannot get the every down, do-it-all running back like Le'Veon Bell, as much as a dream that would be. He has been franchised by the Steelers, and that would have been sweet. I mean, we love Jerick McKinnon, but to have Le'Veon Bell, I think every Vikings fan would agree we would gladly take Le'Veon Bell over Jerick McKinnon.
Absolutely. I mean, he's just a fantastic football player, and one of those kind of, I wouldn't say revolutionary type players, but he's a player that certainly plays the running back position differently than most, and in a good way. I mean, one of the more fluid players that you'll ever see on the field.
Right. So Jamaal Charles obviously just got cut today. Eric Berry just signed a big extension with the Chiefs. You're kind of a Chiefs guy too. Talked a little bit about those guys today, and you can find articles about the Steelers moves and the Chiefs moves on armchairallamericans.com. Maybe not so much the Chiefs, but definitely the Steelers. I know we got that. Maybe we don't have a Chiefs writer yet, but anyways. It'll be interesting to see as we go back to the Vikings here what they decide to do in the offseason at running back. Personally, I think they should go to the draft because I think it's good to get a guy that's lower price, somewhere in the 4th to 5th round, maybe 3rd. Get a guy like Samaje Perine. I really like him as a complement to Peterson McKinnon. We just got rid of Peterson, hopefully. I think that would be a good compliment, and I've had numerous people say that, yeah, that would be a good compliment to Jerick. I think if you try and get somebody like Kareem Hunt, I think he's good, but I think he's more of a do-it-all kind of running back from what I've seen. Maybe he's more power guy, but I think it's good to have one of each, one power, one speed / finesse kind of running back, and I think Perine, whatever you want to call him, I think he would be a good complement to McKinnon. What do you think on that, and what are some of your guys that you'd like to keep an eye on for the Vikings?
Yeah, I'm actually PFF's one of their Chiefs writers, and so I had an article that came up today that was the free agent preview for Kansas City, and I had one of the guys that they must sign to be Eric Berry, and then of course it happens today, which is interesting. As a person that's followed the Chiefs as a fan for a while, I very much, think if they could get somebody like Jamaal Charles at the right price, with not a ton of guarantees, I think you somewhat have to look at that. But yeah, in an event where you're looking at the draft, I think again you want backs that are sort of well-rounded, but also backs that are that you're not going to sort of require a ton of that are going to require a ton of sort of built-in time to develop. So guys that you can just kind of plug and play. But, I like somebody, like Wayne Gallman of Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
Last year he gave up 0 sacks and 0 quarterback hits in, it looks like 183 pass blocking snaps. So he's one of those guys that, sort of has played. He was kind of an every down player last year in many ways for Clemson. And I sort of like players like that can catch, that can run. He's a very smooth runner. I think he'd be kind of like near the top of the draft. And so, I do kind of endorse your idea of kind of waiting until later. But then again, if you wait till later, the chances of a player like that having, some sort of impact is maybe a little bit smaller. But yeah, I mean, I think a guy like, I wrote about this for the Chiefs, but I think a guy like Danny Woodhead is somebody coming off an injury that's going to be relatively inexpensive. You could take a flyer on him. He's kind of McKinnon-like, but I don't think they're too much the same to not have on the same team. Right. And of course, there are backs like there's a lot of steam right now about Latavius Murray, and Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray isn't half bad. Sort of quickly looking here on some of the particulars on Murray here for Oakland.
Does he fumble in key situations?
He does not. He had 12 touchdowns a year ago, which is huge, right? Matt Asiata really struggled.
More than any Vikings running back?
Yeah, well, and Matt Asiata really struggled just in short yardage situations. Murray
Yes, he did.
Carries a little down, but he averaged 4 yards a carry. He averaged 2.6 yards per carry after contact, which would be a substantial upgrade for the Vikings. From last year, he graded positively in all factions of the game. So he's a player. He's probably going to cost a little bit too much money, so that would be a downer. But that's somebody I think that
Guy Kaplan,
as a complementary piece to McKinnon would be a good person to put in there. One of the questions you have to have with Murray is that Oakland's offensive line was quite good last year, so how much of his success is due to a good line in front of him and how much is due to his actual ability. But nonetheless, there's always there's going to be there are a lot of free agent backs. It's just, how much tread on all those tires are you willing to deal with for the money that you're going to have to pay to them?
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the Vikings decide to do. I kind of have thrown out the idea that they should just go all in on the offensive line, the whole thing in free agency. I just think there's not enough. Maybe grab 1 to 2 offensive linemen in the draft at most, and then just get the rest of the guys in free agency. Because if you look at the Vikings' track record of drafting offensive linemen, it is not good, especially in the later rounds. They've had some success, like John Sullivan, Brandon Fusco for a year or two, and a couple other guys too. But for the most part, when you got guys like Willie Beavers in the 4th round, TJ Clemmings in the 4th round, and some other guys that I probably I don't even remember the name of, that they've taken. It's just been a dumpster fire for draft picks for the offensive line in the draft for Rick Spielman.
Yeah, I guess I have a different opinion. I think that the Vikings have drafted linemen later well. Like if you can, in a 10-year span, if you can get a guy like Sullivan and a guy like Fusco, that's about the going rate if you're going to spend 6th-round picks on offensive linemen. The problem the Vikings have is that they don't draft offensive linemen high enough.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So their strategy is poor. Their results have been exactly what you would expect. If you're going to draft, 10 offensive linemen in the bottom half of the draft and 2 of them work out, then you should be happy. It's the Khalil thing, right? They drafted Khalil high, and he hasn't really panned out. And then prior to that, you're thinking about like guys like Marcus Johnson, right?
Yeah.
Who was quite poor. Ryan Cook, quite poor, right? And then the fourth round, it's not as big of a coin flip. But if you're expecting 4th round picks to be offensive linemen, forever, or to be offensive linemen that are stalwarts 100% of the time, you're kind of fooling yourself. Look at growing up, right? We had Todd Stussy, Randall McDaniel, Jeff Christie, David Dixon, and Corey Stringer. Well, okay. Randall McDaniel was a 1st-round pick out of Arizona State in 1988. Yeah. Todd Stussy was a 1st-round pick in 1994, and Corey Stringer was a 1st-round pick in 1995. When the Vikings offensive line started to slip in the early Denny Green era, Dennis Green traded Chris Dolman so he could draft Todd Stussy in the 1st round. Chris Dolman's a Hall of Famer. Traded him so he could draft the guy in the 1st round. And then he didn't hesitate to draft another guy. Well, that works. And David Dixon was kind of an unheralded guy. Jeff Christie, kind of a late round pick. But, 3/5 of that offensive line were 1st-round draft picks. And then you look at the Vikings offensive line now, and I mean, they're lucky that Joe Berger's one heck of a player, even though he's older and he's unheralded. they were lucky they got 5 years or so out of Brandon Fusco as a starting guard. They're lucky, that they could find a guy like Alex Boone in free agency, and they're just flat stupid in terms of how they handled the right tackle position.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's just their strategy. It's not the results, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I see both ways. I mean, obviously you draft somebody and you hope they pan out, but like Willie Beavers, he could have been undrafted or at least a very late draft pick if the Vikings didn't take him in the 4th round. That's maybe not a great example. And obviously TJ Clemmings is a fantastic athlete, but he does not have the smarts to really play, and he doesn't have the he can't say the ability because, like I said, he's pretty athletic, but just doesn't have the football acumen to play left tackle, and right tackle wasn't much better.
Yeah, and I mean, these are all projections. So, like, you look at PFF, we've been grading college since 2014. TJ Clemmings was the 2nd highest graded tackle in the 2014 season of all the tackles that played in Division, what they used to call Division 1A, right?
Mm-hmm.
2nd highest in the entire of that entire group. So there's clearly some talent there.
Right.
Willie Beavers, on the other hand, was the 2nd lowest graded tackle in our entire system. And so, if you look at that, like, you're looking at you're flipping a relatively decent coin, although again, this is all projections, and sometimes projections don't work. We have high grades on players all the time that don't end up working out, and sometimes we have more modest grades on guys that end up being fantastic. I think Deion Jones had a good rookie year for the Falcons, and we weren't particularly high on him. Daniil Hunter was a guy that we were a little skeptical of because he wasn't very productive at LSU. He actually graded well, but it was more as a run defender, and he's ended up being really well. These are all projections. But as Rick Spielman said this week in a study that we all sort of could have saved his money and just done ourselves, but the higher you draft a guy, the more likely he is to work out.
Right.
And so it's just about, the defensive players they've drafted. That's why they have a good defense. They've spent a lot of capital on high round picks, and that's exactly what you would expect.
Yeah.
On the offensive line, they've addressed it differently, and in my opinion, probably, last year was an anomaly, but it's in the direction that they probably should have expected. They should expect poor offensive line play given the way that they've addressed it in both free agency and in the draft.
Do you think some of that has had to do with the possibility that coaching has not been as good on the offensive line too, or do you think it's been solely misjudging talent or the talent not panning out?
I mean, I think coaching's a big issue, in terms of if you look at the Vikings offensive lines from the 90s, Mike Tice was certainly a person that was instrumental in taking a 7th or 6th round pick from Harvard and Matt Burke, turning him from a tall tackle into a all-pro center, right? And, he's kind of had success coaching up offensive lines wherever he's been. And there was the issue with Sperano didn't really have a whole lot of time for John Sullivan because John Sullivan was kind of a thinking man center, and Tony Sperano just wanted him to block, and keep his mouth shut and that kind of thing. But then on the other hand, you look at it, it's like, well, Jeff Davidson clearly wasn't the problem, right? Because he was the offensive line coach when they took Khalil and Charlie Johnson and Fusco and Phil Lodeholt, Sullivan, and got a 2,000-yard season out of Peterson. Is he a good coach that year and a bad coach in 2015?
Yeah.
And then they get rid of him and bring in Sperano, who's apparently an offensive line genius, and their offensive line gets worse. Does that mean he's a bad coach? I think it's all of the above need to be thought of, but the paramount feature is talent, and it's just that offensive line just didn't have a ton of talent last year or depth. And like Andre Smith, that was a first guess. Andre Smith was bad his last year in Cincinnati. He was getting worse. You know, if you look at his PFF grades, you look at his production levels, they were declining, and they were declining every year since the 2012 season for him. That was very good. Mm-hmm. And when they signed him, a lot of us said, well, this is a home run. This is not a home run. This is a Hail Mary of a signing.
Right.
Maybe it'll work out, but it probably won't. And of course, he was every bit as bad as Searles was before he got hurt.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, talent. They were just lacking talent, lacking depth.
Right.
And it came back and really hurt them.
Yeah. Do you think I gotta get going here pretty quick? But do you think that the Vikings have put or Rick Spielman maybe in particular put too much into John Sullivan and Phil Lodeholt coming back? Like those guys are they're in their 30s already at offensive line. Obviously, offensive linemen can play a little longer at times, but they've just come off injuries. Lodeholt's had multiple throughout his career. An offensive lineman with a back injury, that's never a good thing. You don't meet a guy that's had a bad back before and has got a good back now, that type of thing. Do you think that Rick Spielman did not invest enough, or do you think that it was kind of hard to foresee all the things that went wrong with the offensive line this year?
Well, I think it was a little bit misguided to assume Lodeholt was going to be a player so he had a pectoral injury in 2014 that had kept him out. He had an Achilles in 2015. I'm assuming that when they re-signed him, they felt that if he wasn't ready to be a starter in 2016, he would at least be Andre Smith's backup, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if they anticipated his unwillingness to want to play if he wasn't going to be a good player anymore. Because I think we look at Phil Lodeholt. Phil Lodeholt was actually a pretty good tackle.
Yeah.
He struggled in pass protection early in his career, but he made a couple PFF top 101 player lists. He was a good tackle, and I think that maybe they thought, well, we'll have Lodeholt and Smith. Well, Lodeholt was that was a long shot, right? Mm-hmm. And then Smith being any good was a long shot, right? And then they're like, well, maybe Clemmings will be better this year. Well, Clemmings was one of the worst tackles in the NFL as a rookie, right? And he was not anywhere near as bad as he was as a second-year player, but they had faith in him. And then, of course, they've always projected Khalil to return back to his best season, mm-hmm. which was as a rookie. But that appears to probably that's not going to happen ever again, probably. And so I think they made a lot of misplaced faith leaps forward with their tackles. And then, with Fusco competing with Mike Harris had a pretty good year in 2015. I don't put that all on them.
No.
The only thing fishy there is that they had to have known that Mike Harris wasn't going to be well earlier than training camp, and maybe they could have addressed the guard position there more properly. But at the same time, they did spend draft picks and Gerald Hodges, right? They traded for Nick Easton and Jeremiah Searles mm-hmm. during the 2015 season, and so they probably wanted to have seen those guys play anyway. And so I don't know. I think that their inability to use top draft picks on offensive line has really hamstrung them. And 2016 was kind of, and I think it was Andy Carlson that said this on his podcast. It was like, that's the tax that they have to pay for that dumb decision.
Yeah. I can kind of agree with him on that one. So I guess last question for you. Do you think Matt Khalil, the Vikings will try to bring him back, or do you think they should? Or what are your thoughts on Matt Khalil?
I think that they should exhaust other options first, which I think if free agency starts and Andrew Whitworth is available, I think that you give him as much money as he wants, and then you maybe add $1 million or $2 million per year added to that so that he doesn't take that back to Cincinnati and ask them for that much. I think, he's that good, and the variability there is that minimal that that's something that you have to go after. Riley Reef, I think you go after him. I think you even spin the tires on players like Russell Okung, and that kind of thing. I wouldn't even bat an eyelash at thinking about going after a couple guards like Kevin Zeitler, TJ Lang, Larry Warford. I would go after a couple guards and see if you can't think about possibly playing Alex Boone at left tackle, drafting a guy and kind of having a contingency plan of playing Alex Boone at left tackle until the draft picks that you get are ready to play. I think you go through a lot of different scenarios because Matt Khalil, he didn't miss a ton of snaps. He always played hurt until 2016. That doesn't mean he played well. And I think, there's something to be said if he can just be an average left tackle, they're in a good spot. But he hasn't really shown the ability to do so since basically 2012. He's been a below average left tackle in the NFL for the last 4 years. So I just don't know. I think that there's so much misplaced faith there if you re-sign him that I wouldn't do it. That doesn't mean they're not going to do it, though. I mean, Rick Spielman has a lot of pride. It's the reason why they hung on to Blair Walsh forever. It's the reason that they hung on to Jeff Locke forever. He really does not like to admit failure on draft picks. So I'm not saying that they won't do it. I'm saying that they shouldn't.
Right. Yeah, and it's one. I agree with you on that. It seems like Spielman has such a hard time swallowing his own pride on those things, and when you come back to it, free agency. If you have Andrew Whitworth out there, he is by far better than Matt Khalil. How can you not say yes to that? I mean, you've got the money to give him. I would give Andrew Whitworth at least 2 times the amount that you would give Matt Khalil, which is probably $5.5 to $6 million in free agency because of his injury and his inconsistency the last few years. I would not bat an eyelash to give Andrew Whitworth at least double that, if not a little more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just one of those things where if that opportunity presents itself, it seems like it would fit like a glove, and then you right your wrongs in the draft by drafting a tackle high and grooming him for the future.
Yep. All right, Eric, I've already kept you over time, so we will wrap up the show here. First of all, thank you, Eric. As Andy Carlson, the guy you've joined podcasts with multiple times, calls you the Professor, we'll call you the Professor too. We thank you for joining us here on the You Don't Know Jack show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care.
You bet. All right, that is going to do it for the show. Have a good one. We will see you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening to the You Don't Know Jack show with Jonah, Aaron, and Carson. If you want to read articles, get more information, or have questions about the show, go to our website, youdon'tknowjackshow.com. You can subscribe and listen to the show on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, SoundCloud,